Hey everybody, this is Petey from the Spinner Rack, and today I decided to do this video. You looked at the thumbnail, it said the original plans for Crisis, right? So we have Crisis here, right? And it's famous for what we have in here. But as I was going through, not this volume, which is the actual original story, they did their best to reprint it because didn't have, I guess they didn't have film. It was on flexograph, so they did this decent job of recreating it from the comic books where they had to, right? So they have this great Perez art. Now, most of the time, a lot of people, well, I had a surprising thing, right? Because I was reading this and I was surprised to see how much bits were kind of left out. Let's not say it's all incorrect, but different bits that are left out, right? Now, if you read, I think it's Avengers versus Justice League, JLA, they had the bit that Marvel and DC were kind of warring against each other, right? So it was interesting to see that we had those tidbits in here. What we don't have here is how kind of the struggles and the of what this was, of what it was that they do have the bits that this was originally titled History of the DC Universe, which was a thing where they were going to go through the entire history, like we saw in the two graphic novels or the prestige format. They went through the history. They would go through the history for 12 issues, and then after issue 12, they would blow up the DC universe and start up with new number ones. So it's kind of funny that at some point when Marv was doing this, and you could see they talk about the build-up, sending memos. They have a lot of the memos in here, sending the stuff. They talk about how not a lot of the creators were happy to have to work on this, but at the same time, Roy Thomas was one who was happy and did try to do as much as he could to help. But then they also leave out facts that Roy Thomas lost the title in All-Star Squadron, which he wasn't happy. That ultimately at the end, he had a lot of plans to continue All-Star Squadron along with Infinity Inc. And he wound up just working on Infinity Inc. and then the Young All-Stars and other books. But All-Star was a book he started way before Infinity Inc., Young All-Stars, anything else. So there were some bits that they didn't get into here, and I was surprised to see some of the other stuff. Now, to give you the history, Perez wasn't actually the artist on the book. They didn't have an artist on the book, right? So at some point, Perez was leaving or separating from the Titans, doing less work on it, trying to figure out what his next project was going to be. And he heard about Crisis that had all these characters. And he was like, why aren't you guys asking me to do this? I'd love to do this. He was like, which characters would you like to do? All of them. So basically they signed up Perez, but this was actually, when it got to this stage where they were doing it, this was Marv's book. And I said this, and I don't think it gets to people that this was Marv's. Like, this was not the usual, even though he's credited here as co-plotter and co-editor. So I have to see it, but here you just have writer, penciler, inkers, and Perez, if you read, I think it's Amazing Heroes 50, he talks about how this was kind of Marv's thing, but Perez, DC was like, they wanted him in there because they know he could kind of wrangle Marv. And after issue 3, they would kind of like notice that some of the threads were kind of getting looser and going different ways. I think because at the end of one story, she says she's going to kill the Monitor, and then she doesn't do it till the end of issue 4. So they were kind of like, yeah, we really need Perez to kind of take a larger hand in the plotting, not to change the plot, but just keep things manageable, right? So that's one of the bits. The other bit, so I guess this is actually not going to be that long a video, right? The other bit is that we see here, oh, we can't see here. We see on this cover, the one thing that we didn't know that they don't talk about in Crisis is that 3 characters getting a makeover. And that was a plan from the beginning. The 3 characters was Superman from Earth 1, Wonder Woman from Earth 1, and the Flash from Earth 1, right? And you saying, yeah, we got Byrne Superman, we got George Perez on Wonder Woman, and we got Wally West as Flash. Now, what I've been able to piece together, that's not the case, right? But if we go here, we go to this compendium, right? They have a discussion about it where they talk about it, and they ultimately act as if there was there was only one thing that could set the plans left, right? That kind of would put things off course, right? So they say the only one was Superman, right? So here, let's see, what is that? Sorry. An interesting byproduct of the events of Crisis and Alan Moore's fresh take on the Swamp Thing was DC Comics suddenly becoming the destination for creators. Jeanette Kahn, Paul Levitt, and Dick Giordano went out seeking talent while talent came knocking at DC's door. Suddenly, 1985 was a busy year with many new projects suddenly underway. Some of them, such as Frank Miller's audacious take on Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, or Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen, had no bearing on events of Crisis. On the other hand, a fresh start on continuity-inspired management to seek a new beginning for Superman and Wonder Woman to accompany the planned Miller storyline Batman Year One. Now, we stop here, right? So what they're saying is the most successful of the reboots, even though it's not called a reboot, is that they're saying that this was always planned. Now, this was not always planned. They kind of had something in line. So this idea that DC had these plans for Batman, and I've already gone through a video on DC and Batman, right? DC had plans for Batman. They had the Dark Knight going, but they also were trying to figure out the regular teams, right? So they had Denny O'Neil coming in. Dick Giordano was trying to get Michael Golden. They were talking to Steve Englehart. They already had Mike W. Barr. They had things going on and plans, but they were trying to put together, and they even have the artists for this. Frank Miller had went to Trevor Von Eden for Batman Year One. So everything was, this video is mainly kind of say everything is up in the air, right? So the idea that DC already had perfect plans for this is not true, right? This, Frank Miller says, was originally a project called Metropolis. So with that said, let's keep going with this, right? Wonder Woman was the first to be totally rethought. Several writers pitched their notions until Greg Potter, a fan who had landed his first credits on DC on Gem, Son of Saturn, presented the best concept. Once Potter's proposal for the Amazon Princess was accepted, editor Janice Race managed to get George Perez interested. More than interested, obsessed. George suddenly knew that Wonder Woman would be his next big project and threw himself into research and the lore, and eventually became the new series guiding force. It allowed Marv to learn enough about what was happening to see to it that Crisis left Wonder Woman reduced to her original clay form, awaiting new gifts from the gods before returning to life, right? So this is kind of the backwards, because they left Wonder Woman in a place where she was supposed to be restarted. But George Perez didn't get to Wonder Woman till well after Byrne had signed on for Superman. So the idea that Marv planned it and then he just picked up the ball and ran didn't happen, right? Ultimately, George Perez has talked about this many a time, that DC had a proposal that they were going with, and this is not the first time. Ultimately, they decided they didn't like the proposal. They had some issues with it, right? Even though Steve Gerber had put forth his Amazon pitch, that he had some ideas for Wonder Woman, they picked Greg Potter's one where they had, the Amazons were the victims of some sort of violence and death, and they were souls that were saved. And then that was a concept they picked, but at the same time, they were kind of iffy on it. And George Perez came much later, so we'll get to that later. But at the same time, they're trying to put it to you as if this happened as a perfect storm. Like, hey, Marv heard that, they put it together. Marv had no connection to George Perez and Wonder Woman. Perez was not even connected to Wonder Woman. That came much later, and that process stalled, right? And even year one happens way after. I think Wonder Woman, year one happens in close to 87, and then Wonder Woman happens. So the Superman plans kind of happened first, but we're going to get to this story's tale of what happened with Superman. So we're going to get to some bigger stuff here, right? So Superman proved more difficult to reimagine. By the time DC and John Byrne, coming to the company after a celebrated decade at Marvel, settled on a deal for him to help revamp the Man of Steel, there was no way he could get started within weeks of Crisis issue number 12. As a result, the spring of 1986 saw a slow fading away of the Silver Age Superman and family. One benefit was it allowed Julie Schwartz to commission Alan Moore for his final issues of Superman and Action Comics. If nothing else, rang down the curtain of the Silver Age of DC Comics, these issues featuring whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow did the trick, right? So they have it that Byrne's Superman delayed what was going on. We've already done a video on this, right? We've already done it, right? And you even have it in the Krypton Chronicles, and also in Amazing Heroes. In Amazing Heroes, they mentioned that DC had totally stalled on the idea of what they were going to do with Superman. They totally stalled. And Marv, who was one who pitched us his own Superman, so did Cary Bates, so did Frank Miller, so did Steve Gerber. These pitches, and it might be even more, but all these pitches were shelved by DC. And Marv Wolfman is the one who told DC that John Byrne's contract is had lapsed. So that's when Dick Giordano went to DC. So it was totally not connected, planned. They had already scrapped the idea of ending everything and going anew, right? They weren't getting what they wanted, and they stopped. They understood that fans would come, but there's only other one person who mentioned this, right? I'm going to get back to the Wonder Woman stuff too, is George Perez, right? So with George Perez, he mentions that in Amazing Heroes, and let me take a quick look before They asked him about something that's the most celebrated part of Crisis, right? The most celebrated part of Crisis is that Wally West became the Flash, right? That is the most celebrated part of this, right? But what if that was never the plan, right? And he said, they asked him, how was the decision to make Wally West the Flash reach? Basically, they just ran out of ideas of what they can think of. After trying to figure out a new Flash, they realized they weren't getting anywhere. One idea was unacceptable, the other idea was unacceptable, and at the end, the end of the series was starting to come up, right? So here, in truth, they were planning not to say goodbye and do the legacy of having Wally West be the next guy. Their idea was for this next generation post-Crisis, there'd be a totally new Flash, not connected to Barry Allen, not be a legacy character, a new character fit for the new age. Now, at times, they said they can't bring Barry back. At times, I think Marv Wolfman said he could totally bring him back. But ultimately, DC had planned to make a totally new Flash, right? So, and then he says, we needed something. They couldn't think of a new Flash that wouldn't be unique unto himself or herself. So unfortunately, they decided to go with Wally as a Flash, which was a logical thing. But what bothered me was technically we just killed the costume, because he's the same basic character, and anyone who picks up the book without any knowledge of who Wally West or Barry Allen, we're going to immediately think it was the same character. So there was no real reason in my mind to have killed them all, since all you did was technically kill off Barry Allen, who was not the problem. You kept the Flash, who's supposedly the problem, right? So that's the thing. DC felt that Flash couldn't work anymore, right? So they were going to give you a new Flash. That's why they didn't give Flash a series right after it, right? They were trying to figure out what to do. They did have this character that can only run the speed of sound, which would give you the idea that maybe a little more, but they had no plans as of yet. That came with Legend, right? So then, and he says, have any final thoughts on Crisis then? He says that it was unfortunate confusion at the end of the series. The company having to decide what we could do, what we could not do, what wouldn't be done, what would be done. That made some of the problems that existed later. Like, if there's only one Wonder Woman, who is this Wonder Woman who ended up on Olympus? If Superman isn't totally revamped, why does Superman exist at the end of Crisis? And all the other things that cause confusion. The decision of Superman had not been made at the time of Crisis, right? So that changes what they said here. The decision of Superman had not been made at the time of Crisis originally. When Wonder Woman was evolved, Superman was supposed to go through a similar thing, but they decided no, they didn't want to take that chance. So hear that? That says everything different. That DC, and I think Perez has said it before, he said at different times we're going to kill Superman, but this is one of the first times we hear him say it, that that Superman was going to go through something similar like Wonder Woman. And that's why I initially brought up the Krypton Companion, because here Superman, they say Carrie Bates's pitch was Superman was supposed to die in a heroic way, and then he would come back being reborn in the sun, but he'd be a lot weaker, right? And he'd have to go through the struggles of, being reborn type of deal. So that changes the whole idea, this whole thing of, now DC somehow let this person say that John Byrne's plans stalled, his schedule stalled Crisis. It's trying to make Crisis in this thing that was this perfect book that Marv and everyone was trying to, but it was having this many characters and this many plans, even though it was a year-long thing and it came out on time, it still was a struggle, right? And DC hadn't figured things out as of yet, right? So, as saying that the plan was that Superman was going to go through something similar. Perez has also said that Superman was possibly going to die. And that hints to an idea that they had that maybe they were going to go with, and maybe they decided, no, we're not going to do it. So they totally chickened out on everything they were planning to do, right? These three big things of fixing the Flash, because that's what the ultimate thing was. That's why Flash is showing up and he dies heroically in 6, is that he was supposed to be a character that outlived his time. So that's why he doesn't even get his death. People didn't even know that his death actually happened. It wasn't until 12 we realized, okay, and then they had to explain, well, he kind of died in issue 2, but then these times when he comes back, he kind of died here. So that gives you an idea. So going back to Wonder Woman, now that that's what I'm saying. And Perez is the only person who says the confusion is that DC hadn't settled on what they wanted to do. And that's what Marv says when he talked about calling up Byrne, telling DC that Byrne's contract was up. And, so that's how it's been changed to see like, hey, Crisis is this perfect thing. The Office stuff didn't work in the way of working with Crisis when DC just kind of just said, we're making money off of this. Well, but I'm saying the information's already out there, right? And in different ways, Marv hasn't said it directly, but he does say that the Superman plans had stalled. And Perez just said that they did have a plan. I don't know if it was Carrie Bates' plan, but then that leads you to his Wonder Woman. And he said this many a time that once he heard Byrne had signed up for Batman and Miller had signed, Byrne had signed up for Superman and Miller had signed up for Batman. He was like, instead of doing special projects, he was like, wait a second, I need to be a part of the big 3. So he said he went over to the Wonder Woman office and offered himself as a penciler, but they were iffy on this plot, right? So they were kind of iffy on it. And Perez was like, there's some good things about it, I can see, but they allowed him to just take it and do whatever he wanted, right? So you see by issue 3, Perez is the writer or plotter, and Leen Nguyen is the writer, the scripter, right? So you had Leen Nguyen as scripter, and they were reunited from their time as a Fantastic Four. I think Leen was the editor of what's that thing? Of the Titans for a while. So you keep that in mind. DC, the myth of Crisis has kind of taken on this new thing where we kind of say, well, what if we didn't have Man of Steel when at the same time DC is stalled on everything? Like all 3 big plans on the 3 characters all stopped, right? And ultimately, one of the harder things, and that's what I think Marvel found out with the Spider-Man relaunch, you don't get rid of titles unless they're really not selling. So getting rid of possibly All-Star Squadron, stuff like that, you don't really do that. You're not supposed to. Like Marvel was really iffy on getting rid of New Mutants to do X-Force, but it ultimately made them more money, right? Because I guess the New Mutants had dipped at points. So see, this is the point of saying this. They do have another thing where they talk about post-crisis, and they talk about Superboy. And the hard part of it is that, Superboy has had a couple of titles and a couple of times, and those titles were kind of halted, right? They were halted, and then in the weight of the plans to relaunch his title, then they decided to not launch it because of Crisis, because they didn't know where anything would end with Crisis. But they had, I think I have the volume here, they had scripts and stuff already done for this dual Superboy, Supergirl title, which DC ultimately reshelled, saying, wait for what happens with Crisis. So ultimately the sales basically get you that. So I just want to say that this book should have had the information, because it's with Perez in there. It should have tried to put those things in, or a new interview with them. But ultimately, that's interesting how DC had plans for Wonder Woman, The Flash, and even though Wonder Woman wasn't a big part of Crisis, Superman and Flash, that they had these plans and all the plans stalled. And then ultimately, we got Man of Steel first. Dark Knight was coming out at the same time. Oh, that's the other bit I wanted to say to you guys. Now, besides having posters in the comic book stores, Steve Gerber talked about, you have to imagine that these books, Man of Steel, Crisis, anything that's sold, the creators are struggling with Marvel and DC promotion. Well, mainly DC promotion, because Steve Gerber points out that basically, outside of a couple ads, like the promotion department didn't do anything extra besides what they normally do for the Dark Knight. Howard Chaykin also said that that DC didn't expect the Dark Knight to do well. Now, same time, Steve Gerber brought up that they didn't do anything extra outside of promoting to comic books. And when I say, when you see posters in the comic book stores, that's the least amount of promotion you can do, right? Because it's they're already there. How do you get other people outside of comic books to go, right? So the fans who know their stuff are coming to the comic book store, and some new fans might come, but you're not getting that reach. So when you see a successful book like this, and then later the Man of Steel, the DC, and they say Miller, and whereas DC was trying to take credit for Man of Steel since it sold 1 million, they didn't do any extra promotion. Even the reporters coming in and saying, hey, they're changing Superman. That was basically a slow day for them. And they called up saying, hey, we'd like to call someone in. And then they sent Byrne out to the Today Show. But at the same time, it should be the other way around, where where the promotion team takes it and finds as many avenues as they can to promote the book. So I don't know if that really relates to this portion of it, but there's one last tidbit to put in there, because it's real interesting to me to hear Steve Gerber talk about the success of Man of Steel and the success of Crisis and stuff like that, and people sitting around saying, well, what does the promotion department do? And you say, well, I saw a poster for Superman. I saw a poster for that. It's like, but you saw it in the comic stores. Like getting it somewhere outside, promotion department finding somewhere else to go. So I guess that's about it. This one, I guess this took me a while to do, but and the joyous thing of a Crisis cartoon, the other hard part is thinking about it and saying, what was DC's original plan? And it's been kind of, when you see it, what George Perez talked about is the confusion, right? And he didn't want there to be a confusion when you got to the end of the book. And there's so many things where the hero's supposed to forget, the rest of the people didn't forget. Originally supposed to be all number ones. Dick Giordano was against that because nobody wanted to do new number ones. Now he feels, in his memoirs, he said he should have done it. It's just one of those things where you have all this stuff, but when you have a book like this, there's going to be some problems. I'm not trying to take that away from the book, but at the same time, we don't have to give it extra stuff to say, hey, Wonder Woman's plans were perfect. No, they were not perfect. Superman plans delayed, kind of set things back. Like, no, they didn't. Superman's plans, they'd already canceled Superman's plans. They didn't pick anything. They could have picked any one of these pitches, depending if it was sold well or not. Maybe the Miller one would, maybe the Gerber one, maybe Marv Wolfman, who knows? But at the same time, to kind of be like, well, I guess what am I asking? Well, it's DC. It's a DC thing. They can put whatever they want in and everyone will. The thing about comic history is that, even though people say that they read these things, they don't. They don't want to read this stuff. Ultimately, hearing Perez say something critical about something that they love, and be like, well, what's wrong with him? Well, they don't. It doesn't read that way, so they'll be like, it had to be a Burns saying, "Hey, this thing didn't work out." And it's like, see. So anyway, happy reading. Check out this and tell me your thoughts on Crisis. Do you feel like it kind of got to the end and was perfect ending, or not, or some of the behind the scenes of what they originally planned to fix Flash, restart Superman and Wonder Woman, and to get obviously you had these two big titles. They already had plans for Batman, so they didn't really have anything that already had something. The idea of reboot kind of worked though for them. So anyway, I think that's about it. Spinner Rack is out.